Hi, and welcome back to the Shifting Schools podcast. My name is Trisha Friedman, and I'm hosting this week's episode on my own without Jeff Udick. He's going to be very jealous that he missed this week's conversation because we're talking about information literacy, and Jeff is a huge fan of thinking about that, especially right now, the ways that AI is shifting what it means to have information literacy. Our special guest this week is Reid Hepler, who's got so much expertise to be helping us with this exploration and rethinking really how we're going to navigate the evolving landscape of archives in the era of AI. Reid's going to explain that while some might think that archives and AI don't have anything to do with one another, that kind of couldn't be further from the truth. He's going to demystify what an archivist does in the first place. So if you've got students that are, again, just thinking about research, why it matters, how it matters, this is a great episode to share with them. Let me tell you a little bit more about our special guest. Reid Hepler is a digital initiatives librarian, an instructional designer, and an artificial intelligence practitioner and consultant. He obtained a master's degree in library and information science with an emphasis in archives management and digital curation. He has worked at nonprofits, corporations, educational institutions, and he is a big believer in information literacy, that it has to be a part of the work that we do. Currently, Reid works as a digital initiatives librarian at a college in Idaho and has his own consulting firm. You're going to be able to learn more about connecting with Reid by heading over to the show notes. Before we dig into this week's incredible conversation, we do have a quick word from our show sponsor.
Shifting Schools is excited to be sponsored by newlight.io. Their platform is designed to simplify MTSS frameworks for personalized student support. Built by leading experts, New Light focuses on getting educators the answers they need fast. Which students need which levels of support? With simple data collection and insightful analytics powered by AI, New Light's platform provides actionable solutions to support your students effectively. Try it for free at newlight.io. That's NEULIGHT.io. Check the link in the show notes to learn more. Hey folks, FETC, that's the Future of Education Technology Conference, is just around the corner, happening January 14th through 17th, 2025 in Orlando. It's your chance to be part of the first and best EdTech event of the year. As a special offer, just for the Shifting Schools community, you can use promo code SHIFTING10 at checkout for an extra 10% off an all access or session passes. Head to FETC.org to register today, save, and get ready to bring the future of education into your school. That's Shifting10, all caps, Shifting10 at FETC.org for an additional 10% off. Offer ends December 13th.
And with that, on with the show. Reid, I am so excited to be speaking with you as part of this series because when I go through my list of folks to be chatting with about the role of the archivist in this new era of generative AI, you're maybe one of the best people on the planet to be talking about that with. I'm wondering if you could speak to our listeners about where you see the role of archival work changing in connection with generative AI, which seems to be shifting just about every job under the sun. How is it shifting your practice?
So it's really interesting because you would think that, and I talk about this in my blog posts that I have, but you would think that archives would be antithetical to AI use and vice versa. But really, when you focus on the human aspect of The human is in control of AI interactions. The human is in control of what happens and what the product is. There's really a lot of use. I was talking with a group on Facebook and LinkedIn, also, I guess, two groups, but a lot of them overlap in membership. And one of the most prominent members said that they didn't find a lot of applications because they're at a larger institution and they prefer to have things that are more automated or more kind of, you don't have to have somebody edit things or adjust things. And so they didn't really have an insight into useful AI things because it was just a lot of things they had to go and check and edit again. So it wasn't really useful for them. But I thought it was really helpful because I had time and I could go and have the AI draft things or do things, and then I could edit it. But it all depends on what your institution is. But I think that archival work is going to be more, you're not going to have to write everything out. You're not going to have to make your EAD XML records by hand. Right now, I would, and I do. But I did have an AI tool that made it almost completely accurate. But the time I had to go back through and edit every line and every field was time consuming. So I just decided to write it up myself and use a template. But I could see eventually how you could have all the XML code written out by the AI tool. There's an option and a potential for rote and procedural archival record creation and stuff could be changing to be more of a fluid.
I'm wondering if we should take a step back, and our audience of K-12 educators, we like to have episodes with experts that are also dual purpose, where we're learning from you regarding the topic of discussion, like you just so eloquently did, but you also help, I think, folks think about other career pathways, right? Mm-hmm. So in K-12, we're always trying to open up different doors for our students. So for somebody who's listening and they're thinking, I actually don't maybe even know what an archivist, forget about what they're going to be doing in the future with AI, but I don't know that I'm sure what they do today. Can you talk a little bit more about that? Because something that I'm always fascinated with is how many different types of organizations will have somebody doing that work. And it's almost every organization needs an archivist. I don't know if you feel like that's fact or fiction, but maybe you can demystify, like, what is the profession?
Yes, and this is interesting that you brought it up. There are two. So archives is the storage. It's the acquisition, storage, preservation, and a lot of people call it servicing. Some people call it presenting or interpreting historical records. So you take all these things, you organize them, you say, why is this important to any researchers, or why do we need to keep these records so that an institution can know what it did in the past, and then we organize them and record them and preserve them. And that may seem like it's keep every single document ever made, but it's not. And it's the archivist's role to decide what materials should be preserved or kept, how they should be preserved, what records they should be preserved with, and also when to get rid of the records. For instance, in my job as an archivist at an institution, recently I got rid of probably 2 whole shelves of materials that were too old and were also shouldn't have been collected in the first place because they were outside of our institution's scope. When you talk about all sorts of institutions having archivists, some institutions do have archivists, like Wells Fargo has an archivist, but there are also some other institutions, they have what are called records managers. And archivists and records managers get territorial when you misnomer them. They're like, oh, you're an archivist, but for a business. They're like, no, that's not at all what I do. But the important thing is they record and they keep records. It's just a little different way of thinking about it. But yeah, so archivists are essentially, they keep a record of an institution's impact on society and their operational value. And then as an academic institution's archivist, I also keep records about the surrounding area that I live in and its institutions, churches, businesses, social groups, different ethnicities and racial groups. We have in our local archives, we have a group of oral histories, interviews with Czech Basque immigrants to the area and how their life was in the Czech Republic and the Basque area and how they came here and stuff like that. All sorts of stuff. But essentially, if you're a researcher, if you're a teacher or someone coming to the archives, you're probably asking yourself, what happened in history at this time, or what's the history of this organization that I'm interacting with, or things like that.
So for somebody who is hearing that and they're thinking, what might be really cool to create like an archive of our class for this year? If they were going to set something like that up, are there any kind of frameworks or tools or just mindsets that you think really set you up to do that work? Because I'm guessing one of the missteps that an organization would want to avoid is it's not just like a singular perspective dominating the archive.
Yes.
Can you say more about that as a project and how what somebody would maybe want to keep in mind if they embark on that?
Yeah, so that's really important. So one of the main things you want to know in the archives is the structure of an organization. What levels of groups are there, or levels of people in a class? Probably it's going to be the teacher, and then maybe I guess high school doesn't really have teachers' aides, do they? No, you have the teacher, and then you have the students, and then you might have different groups of students in there. And so they might interact with people differently, or they might have different educational goals. I obviously haven't been in K-12 recently, so I don't really know how that is. But then you would have people submit, maybe you would have the teacher submit keep the lesson plans or the course objectives or the class objectives. And then you would have maybe a few students anonymize their assignment submissions, or you would maybe record discussions you had in class. And it's very difficult sometimes because obviously you have to keep FERPA in mind and privacy and confidentiality, but kind of what your structure is, what your objectives are, and how you fulfilled those objectives, and maybe the students' perspectives on what their experience was fulfilling those objectives, how that helped them, maybe some representative assessment submissions. I would also maybe oral histories, maybe interviews with the students. So you could go as deep as you want to go with that, but that really would be really helpful. And a little bit, the outcomes assessment model, where you have, this is the outcome, and this is the assessment, and this is what happened, how we fulfill the assessment. That's basically what you would keep for the archives.
I'm wondering, do you think it's a balancing of, is the audience of the archive always meant to be a future persona, or are you thinking about the reality that archives are also useful present day? Is it like your aim is for both?
So that's really, and there's debates on exactly what the purpose of the archives is. In fact, I'm going to talk a little bit about archives theory. So there's one of the main archivists. He is in the United States. He passed away. His name is T.R. Schellenberg, and he wrote what's called the Modern Archives. He was very associated with the National Archives of the United States. And there's another one, and his name is Jenkinson, and he was in the National Archives for the United Kingdom. And they hated each other because one of them said, you need to be focusing on the future researcher. What is they going to find useful? What are they going to want to know? And if it's not something that the future researcher is going to want to know, then you need to get rid of it. It's not useful. Jenkinson, on the other hand, said, no, the future researcher has nothing to do with the archives. The purpose of the archives, and this kind of shows you how World War I and World War II influenced initial archives practice. Basically, they said, if the whole world were to be destroyed and the archives were the only thing left, would someone be able to come in and see the structure and functions of an organization and be able to recreate that organization from scratch? That's the purpose of the archives. So everything in an institution is kept, at least at the high to medium level. Yes, there's multiple things. Just from a pragmatic, I'm not an archivist standpoint, I don't think that the world is going to end. The future is good. Yeah, don't keep everything, just keep a representative thing. But that's a really good point. And that kind of informs, coming back to the AI aspect, you can tell the AI, this is the focus of my archives. This is the focus of this collection. Should I keep this material? What should I do about this? Or should I make this digital? Or do you think people are not going to want it? And of course, you have to take what the AI says with a grain of salt, because it's not a human, it's not a stakeholder, it's not your administrator, but it can help you ideate. Should I keep this? Should I not keep this? So
I love that idea, Reed. And I'm thinking for somebody who's maybe even a little further along in their AI journey, to generate like a custom bot that is always going to help you go through that process of deciding if it belongs in the archive or not, because I'm thinking also about different snippets of notes and uploading that to the bot and asking it. And that came to mind, I think, in part because you've written a lot about one of your favorite ways to engage generative AI, and that is, of course, in the area of note taking. It's a fascinating use case. Can you tell our listeners a little bit more about your thoughts on using generative AI for that area?
Yes. So that's very good. So note taking is very useful whenever you go into an archives collection. You have a massive collection, and then you divide it into different series, whether it's administrative documents, financial documents, etc. And then you analyze those, and then you analyze all of the documents as a whole. And after you do that, you write what's called a scope and content note and a biography note. And while you're analyzing these documents, you have to take notes, and then you compile all of that data, that information into scope and content and biographical note. The scope and content note is this collection or these series of documents covers this time period about these topics from the perspective of this. It has these biases. I don't include biases in my scope and content note because that would be interpretation. But in kind of a disclaimer, I say these materials may include biases, check for that type of stuff. But anyway, you can include it if you want. And then the administrative and biographical section is about the creator of the documents, the creator of the archives collection. And you say, this is what this person did. And you might want to say, these are the biases this person had. These are the groups this person was a part of. This might be something to look out for when you're analyzing these documents. So keep this in mind. And we have a tendency sometimes as researchers, and it's something we have to control as archivists because everybody does it, to take what's in the documents as what actually happened. And so you have to think, what's not being told here? And we have a saying in archivism that the silences are just as important as the things that are being communicated. You have to think, why is this perspective? What perspectives aren't here? Why is this not here? What marginalized voices or what perspectives are not in here? What can I find about that other thing? And so anyway, but those go into the notes. And then when you research that, I haven't talked a lot about archives research, but then you would, as a researcher, say, okay, archives bot, I have these documents, I have these perspectives, other things are missing. What other collections should I go to find perspectives on this event from these viewpoints? Or are there not many? And I have to go find people who would have perspectives. And that's why it's important to have oral histories or interviews, even if they're 1 or 2 generations removed, to put that in context. It's really important, not only as an archivist, but as a researcher. Take notes and then, just know what the context of the collections is.
It's almost detective work that I feel like you're talking about, which, again, I think that point about making sure that you're looking for where something maybe intentionally or unintentionally was left out, that's an experiment that you can almost do at a local level. I think even with like your own, for folks who are old enough to have a actual photo album in the house, or if the slightly upgraded version of that is the Facebook vacation album, what was left out of that? Or the one Instagram post, what was cropped out of that, so to speak?
Well, and it's intriguing to when you know about an organization and what's in a certain collection. For instance, I was at Utah State University as an undergrad, and I was an intern there at their archives, Merrill Cazier Library Archives. Shout out to USU. And I had the privilege of working through a collection of records by Alice Colton Smith and Winslow Smith. And they were leaders, mid-level leaders in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And so they examined, one of them, Alice Colton Smith, was a member of what's called the General Relief Society presidency. And her records that she had displayed her role in that, what she wrote, what she created. And it was interesting to see what she had that the general church files did not have, or her interpretation on that, because she had the official church records, but she also had communications about those records between her and other members of the board, or her and other members of the church, or other people who weren't members of the church who were in all sorts of other countries, because she visited all sorts of different countries for her work. And so it really was provided a lot of insights into kind of the relationship between church influence and kind of the gender relations there, and different cultures and different countries. And it was a massive kind of basically a paradigm shifter for me to see this is what happened. This is what she did. This is the country she went to and what she learned. And then there's a difference between what was published or what was written. And so really interesting to see. If you have documents that are not in the official record of organizations, that are more informal, they can completely change your paradigm of what happened and what needs to be recorded. And so I completely altered my scope and content note because of those informal documents. Because if I'd only had what she officially wrote and published, it would have been a totally different story. So really interesting.
Wow.
Educators, are you searching for a new space to connect, collaborate, and grow? Well, Camp Shifting Schools is your new home. With the decline of X, formerly Twitter, we're here to offer a safe, welcoming community where you can join other passionate teachers. Take part in free courses, webinars, and live AMA sessions to evaluate your practice. Ready to join the conversation? Head over to camp.shiftingschools.com and become part of the camp community today. Learning and connecting awaits.
Again, I think it's maybe reminding students too, the power of research to tell counter stories, but also to maybe, again, like critical thinking is researching in a way that you're carving out. I don't know if, so are you thinking, again, for somebody who's listening and they want to maybe point a student in the direction of this as a career profession, curiosity seems to be something that you would have a high capacity for.
Yes.
What are some other skill sets that if you're going to work doing archival work, either this is something you might love doing, you wake up in the morning and you want to do, or this is a skill set that's going to be really critical?
I would say love doing boring stuff. And this is true. I had an exciting, because I am a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, so that collection was really interesting to me. But I also, my next collection was a series of papers about the local train transit system. All of their records, and a guy who lobbied first to create the system, and then he actively lobbied against it. So it was really interesting. And that probably seems really boring to people. And then there's the aspects of we would have people who wanted to digitize things. And then that would mean that I would have to count every single page. So I counted it. There's one, I was counting scientific strawberry planting journals. And I digitized like 450 pages or something. I had to count each one of those by hand.
Wow.
So you have to be curious, and you have to find the curiosity in everything. Find the interesting in everything. And with that digitization thing, I spent probably, and granted I was only working 16 hours or 20 hours a week because I was doing part-time work, but I spent probably a week and a half doing that digitizing stuff. And so you have to find the interesting. You have to actively have, this is going to be fun. I'm going to learn things. And it was interesting because I soon became known as the person at the archives who would do basically anything because I'm here to work, I'm here to do stuff, but it really became exciting. So I'm bringing that to my current job, and I'm working with the archives, and there's a lot of things that kind of seem not as exciting, but it's really interesting to see what came in, why it came in. There's a collection right now of a wind farm with wind turbines, and seeing that is really exciting. But other people probably are like, why in the world do we have this collection? But it is interesting because if you know the institution and if you have a history of wind farms in southern Idaho, you know why it's important. So yeah, really cool.
Oh, I love that. That's like having the beginner's mindset and understanding I'm going to be surprised in some way, shape, or form. I typically, if I'm at a conference, it's an educator conference. And I was traveling and it was a really large event space where they had multiple events going on. I went the wrong way down the hallway and I found myself in a glass blower artist convention. It was like hundreds and hundreds of people and nobody kind of kicked me out immediately. So I walked around a little bit and I was like, oh my goodness, I had no idea there were uses for glass blowing over here or in this kind of way. So I feel like that's what you're talking about is get lost in it maybe and be open to being surprised.
Yeah. Case in point, one of my first collections that I did at my current job was a bunch of records about farming, sustainable farming and farming practices in the area. And I was like, this is like amazing. This is the most boring thing ever. Because I was like, the chickens had this many eggs today, and I went into the alfalfa fields and for 2.5 hours, and then I ate pork. And I was like, wow, this is like the dullest thing. But it was really interesting. If you took it as an aggregate, you could see the whole perspective, and you could see how farmers in the area operated, what they prioritized, what they did for social functions, what their political views were, what their social views were, all sorts of things. If you got through the ennui of alfalfa fields and chicken eggs. But yeah, it was really cool. So,
Well, and I wonder if there's a link here with AI again, because I think sometimes, not always, but sometimes we can be like, quote unquote, bored by a topic when it's not that we're bored by it, but we don't know how to understand or appreciate it.
yeah.
And for me, one of the benefits of generative AI has been I came across Microsoft curated this book called AI for Good. And each chapter is a different research paper in terms of some way that AI is being used for good. It has a ton of really technical language. So there were all of the papers are open source. So I was able to take some of them, feed it into ChatGPT and ask it, before I read this, can you just explain the 7 biggest concepts to somebody at the 8th grade level? And I was like, okay, I get this, I get this, I get that. Can you break down like the main research question that's here? Okay, I get. And then I could go back to the paper and I'm like, now I can dig into this. Like before it would have either been too much jargon or the main point might have gone over my head. But with generative AI, as like my reading research buddy, it's helping me like now I can get interested in this because I actually understand it. I don't know if you're thinking about generative AI as a research companion, but I wonder if there's some potential in that direction too.
Yes, I created, and this might be, so there's a website that I created with Steve Hargavan called libraryrobot.org. And it has, or is it libraryrobot.com? I believe it's libraryrobot.org. But it has a bunch of search and library-related capabilities, but also professional-related capabilities. And we have a book finder, there's a book summarizer, but we also have this thing that's called the Search Query Optimizer. And this was born out of the realization I had that people don't have that impressive Boolean skills, and they don't have the time to optimize it because there's only so many librarians in the world. And so this is a way that you can talk to ChatGPT and say, hey, I want to learn about the history of Buddhists in Germany, but not about anything about World War II. And so it will come up with that and you can search it. And then now, since ChatGPT is connected to Bing, you can say, okay, search the web for this. And then it'll come up with articles about this. And you could even say, I only want to search educational sites. I only want to search this EBSCO database things and things like that. And so it requires, and I stress this, and we're going to talk about this in a bit, but it requires that you have information and research skills. But that, and so that's a lot for secondary research. Or if you know the sites that you have primary resources, you can do it yourself and you can use AI to search these sites and find primary resources. I was going to say, when you were talking about how this applies to K-12, of when you're talking to your students, finding the curiosity, help them to ask, so why is this topic important in my life? What connections does this have? And students can ask generative AI that. Why would electrical engineering be important to a 10th grader? What applications would I see in my everyday life? And they can come up with those things. But AI can be a significant research tool if you use it correctly. And I'm going to say this. Do not ask generative AI questions. Ask it to help you search answers to questions. Ask it, what resources can I go to get these questions? But even connecting ChatGPT to Bing, and I would say for high-level general questions, you can do this. Connect to Bing, but you have to say, connect to Bing and search this question. Because if you ask it directly, it's just going to generate fluff, and it's going to lie to you because that's what it's meant to do. It's literally a lie machine, unless you know how to use it correctly. Yes, but the human has to be involved, but it's a great research tool. But again, ask it for help accessing websites. I would have been able to use it, and if I can give an example really quickly, in 2021, 2022, I was getting my master's degree in library science, my first. And I was assigned, I have a digital curation specialty and an archives management specialty. And I was taking a class on archives research. And so we had to write a paper. And I chose the history of Japanese American internment in internment camps and what archive records said about those. And I specifically was looking for the religious and social impacts of that. And it was just a very humbling experience. But I found, and if you ever want to research that just amazing stuff, really fascinating insights, really heartbreaking insights. But I found this website called Densho. I don't know if you know this. It's densho.org. Has massive amounts of oral histories, postcards, letters, official documents, all about Japanese American internment, divided by different people, divided by the camps they went to, divided by the groups they were a part of, and just fascinating things. I could have used ChatGPT to cut down my research on that by a ton, because they had transcripts there, they had all these things. And if I would have used generative AI to say, hey, search densho.org for things related to this, I would have cut down my time considerably. But as it stands, I looked at, I think, probably 200 different oral interviews, and I focused mostly on the oral interviews because they were astounding. But that would have been a really good use case of, hey, AI tool, search this website for this, find the most compelling resources for this. And yeah, so really useful in conversationally searching websites.
Yeah, and I appreciate what you said about the human in the loop, the human really driving the inquiry, because one of the AI-powered research tools that I've been playing a lot with is Consensus AI. And what you can do with that tool is bring it a yes-no research question, ask it to synthesize, and it will give you a summary if it's a yes-no research question, and then it's going to give you the papers, et cetera. You can decide, do I want papers with a certain number of peer review? Do I want within a certain time frame? But I've found the research isn't done then, right? Like often it gives me a really good springboard into doing some new research. But I think that point about our human inquiry and our human research skills are still, or are even more important now with these tools.
Hi, folks. We'll get back to our conversation in just a moment. I want to talk a bit more about newlight.io, the AI FERPA compliant, that's our federal guidelines around privacy of student data, platform making personalized student support a breeze. You know, student privacy is huge in our schools, and Newlight is big on privacy as well. It was one of the first questions I asked the co-founder, Jose, about. There are a few AI systems out there that meet the requirements to being FERPA compliant, and Newlight does just that. Newlight's IntelliTier platform is more than just a data collection tool. It's an AI-powered assistant that has been trained to truly understand the MTSS framework, student context, and school-specific resources. Developed by a team with both social, emotional, and behavioral needs in mind, and with plans to extend into academic support soon. Studies show effective MTSS and SEL implementations can boost attendance, improve grades, and increase graduation rates. Yet many schools struggle with the complexities of gathering data and turning that data into actionable items within the MTSS process. Newlight's IntelliTier platform makes it easy with simple, fast data collection, asynchronous collaboration across the MTSS team, and actionable insight that educators can implement and document their success with. Plus, Newlight is advised by seasoned educators and administrators, so they understand your everyday classroom challenges. You have to try it out for yourself. So head over to newlight.io to give it a try for free. That's NEULIGHT.io. Thank you to Newlight for taking this on, and a proud sponsor of the Shifting Schools community.
Reed, you've also talked about what it means to maybe compare, and I find analogies and metaphors really helpful whenever you're going through a period of change. I love the one that you made about comparing generative AI tools to musical instruments.
Uh-huh.
Say more about that comparison and how
Okay.
you think it might help people.
Yeah, so this is really fun. I love musical instruments. I don't know if you watched the little video on that blog. I played an excerpt of the Petrie and Rag by Scott Joplin and I played it actually two different ways, but I only recorded one because it wasn't good enough. The second one wasn't good enough. And then the one that I recorded, I did the first half kind of straight, and then toward the end, I improvised. And I talked in a video about what it means to compare this. And my point was that both generative AI and musical instruments are tools. But the common denominator of both of these is humans. So with any human-machine interactions, and I talk about this in my blog post too, it's all about bringing the human to human-machine interactions. And people don't like to talk about instruments and art creation as machines, but they are. I press a key, I have and that has a hammer, and that hits the string, and the string vibrates, and I have the pedals that influence that. I think the piano is an excellent example of a multi-layered machine, a multimodal, if you will, machine that gives an output. And the most important aspect is the human element. And you are responsible for the interpretation. You are responsible for the input, but also, especially if you have recording devices, if you're going to record and disseminate it, you're responsible what the end product is. And so I prefer my recordings, and this is my downfall, I prefer them to be all in one take. And so I'll spend 2 or 3 hours on a single piece. But a lot of people, they take, obviously, professionals. Van Cliburn famously took 26 hours to record Rachmaninoff's pieces. And he, if not longer, you play a little bit and then you stop, and then you play a little bit and then you stop, or you play as long as you can, and then you splice the best takes of different takes together. It's really a complex system to make a recording and to publish it. But it is interesting to see that a lot of people aren't really thinking of these things as things that respond to human input. And I think it comes back to we're misunderstanding what they are really. For instance, recently, and this is in August 2024, we had, I don't know if you saw on LinkedIn, there's a post about AI can't know how many R's are in strawberry. That's because it doesn't know the word strawberry. It knows the token straw, and it knows the token berry. And in berry, there's 2 R's. So it's going to say that there's 2 R's because that's the token that has the most R's. It doesn't know them together. It could be that it's ST and then RA and then W. We don't know what the tokenization of it is, but the most common is straw and berry. And it doesn't know the word. It's not a fault of the AI. It's how it's built. It was not built to know that. It's awful at counting. It's awful at spelling. It's really bad at that type of stuff. And so if you try to use it for that, of course it's going to be bad. And this kind of brings me to the researchers and the students' first tool that they use is a physical book with a pen or a pencil. That's the first technology they're introduced to. That's what researchers initially used. In the archives, for instance, you are highly encouraged to have your own paper and a pencil. You cannot have a pen because it could damage the material. And so researchers originally used pencils and paper. And writing, you initially had your blue book essays. So that was the pencil. And then now we have the digital ebooks, the tablets and such, and the laptops. I used to handwrite everything in cursive, which is another topic of conversation. But I still do write in cursive almost exclusively. But now I use my laptop for most of my note taking. Right now, we're not, I don't know where you are, I'm in Idaho, but virtual meetings were whirled away in the 1990s. And then I think it was 2004 when Skype was created. And now virtual meetings are everything. I even do most of my meetings are virtual meetings, even for people who work at my institution and are in the next building over. Like virtual meetings are the way to go now because it just saves time. And so it's just crazy. But even though the technology has changed, that's my point. Even though we're not using books and sometimes we're not using Kindles, now the next step is take it to generative AI and have it do the thing. But you have to remember, that's your note taking. That's not your report creation. That's not your lit review. That's preparation for the lit review. And so you have to remember it's a tool that you use. It's not the act. You're not drafting. Well, you can draft, but even that, again, That's a notes for your draft. It just all brings it down to putting it in perspective. It's a tool, it's a machine, it's not me.
Yeah, the notes one is interesting too, because with Zoom, they have their built-in AI companion that it will take the notes of the meeting for you. But I have found you still, to really maximize that tool, you come back to the human in the loop again. So something I've been doing is when a Zoom meeting ends, if you've turned on your AI companion, yes, it will have done like a transcript summary, can even, I think, give you like a little bit of a timeline or a task itemization. But usually I'll copy that. I'll put that, again, with no private data or anything, into ChatGPT, and I'll ask it, please do two things. Thing number one, invite me to consider what still yet needs to be discussed based on this. And two, generate an email for a team member who couldn't make the meeting. Like a huge time saver if somebody couldn't make it, that now they've got this as a template. And then even both of those things still yet need some human ingenuity to fine tune them.
Yes.
But it really is, as you said, knowing what the tool can do, knowing what it's not good at. The violin is not the thing I'm going to make pasta with.
Exactly.
And then also, I would say, sharing that learning. Read, something that I really appreciate is that you're constantly sharing a lot of your work. Listeners, if you're not following Reed on LinkedIn, I'd recommend you do that. You'll find the prolific generosity where you're sharing things, because even then, you've got your work, you're sharing it. And then we've got a community where people are often commenting or furthering the discussion. I'm wondering if in closing of this conversation, you want to say anything about that piece and why maybe that's been an important component of this, is like the conversation?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's two things I want to talk about. First of all, one of the groups that I joined recently was the Human Intelligence Movement that's led by Dr. Michelle Ament. And it fell into place because I was already communicating with a lot of the members, and then they all joined this movement. I was like, oh, this kind of just talks about what I'm talking about, just in a different perspective. And they are dedicated to creating or helping students become prepared for an AI world, or I like to call it an AI saturated workplace. Like, AI is not going away. You might as well learn how to use it successfully and things like that. And it's all about building communities. I also built an AI in Libraries Slack community of practice, and I shared things on that. Mostly it's me sharing. I'm sure they're sick of me now, but we have monthly meetings. We had 20 to 25 people join our meeting just on Tuesday. And it's all about communicating those ideas. And also, I don't think that information should have a price on it. There's always more, maybe a social price or a cognitive load price. But one of the things that I learned in my master's program was the value of something called open educational resources and open access materials, where you need to be open with your information. And maybe you can put limits on what people can do with it. I don't want this used for commercial means or things like that. But why not share the information? You can make products with it. You can apply it however you want to, but share the information for free. And that's something that I've done. So like with my Substack, I have paid tiers, but I make it very clear. Paying is not going to get you any more information or any more resources than being a free subscriber is, because I don't believe in paywalling that or gatekeeping that, anything like that. And so my philosophy really is that, openness is the way to go. And that was inspired by David Wiley, Dr. David Wiley. If you don't follow him on LinkedIn, you should. He has his own blog, opencontent.org, and he shares his ideas. And one of his upcoming webinars is a thing called Open Education is Becoming Generative AI Education, where he connects, like, generative AI is going to be a massive tool, and it already is, in spreading education and making it affordable and making it accessible. It's all really about, it comes down to, and this will be especially important, I think, to educators, equitable access to learning. Why should students be kept from information that they need and that they want and that they will apply if they're willing to get it, all because they don't have the funds to pay for it? And so I've written, I think, 5 books now, or chapters in books about library science. I just released on Friday Introduction to AI and Ethics in Higher Education. I work with educators to make their own free books, open educational resources. So it's just all about equitable access, providing access. And then if students want to, apply it, the onus is on them. And again, it's the student's responsibility, the user's responsibility, the human's responsibility. Take initiative, act on things, apply best practices. So it's all basically, here's all the stuff I know. Now you have the responsibility to apply it however you want to. That's a really long-winded answer. And you probably know at the end of this interview, I can ramble on a lot until someone says stop talking. But
Reed, no, I really appreciate your insight. And listeners, please know those resources and ways to learn from Reed will be over there in the show notes. In part, sorry, Reed, brace yourself. This is about to be so cheesy. I think like 10 years from now, when we're looking back at like the archive of how education grew during this time, like some of your work belongs in that archive. So thank you so much for sharing your insight. And I look forward to continuing to follow you and again, to see how your work, again, is shaping the change and is also representing this change that we're going through. So thank you again so much for your time today.
No problem. Thank you very much for having me.
Hey there, dedicated listener. If you've made it this far, we know you're passionate about shifting the way education works. And Tricia and I appreciate you. If you loved what you heard today, we'd be so grateful if you could take a moment to rate and review Shifting Schools wherever you listen to podcasts. Those ratings help us reach even more educators just like you. And if you know someone who could benefit from these conversations, please share this episode with them. Just one person. Think of the impact we can make together. Don't forget to sign up for our newsletter for even more great content. And if you haven't already, join us at Camp Shifting Schools, where the conversations keep going long after the podcasts end. Thank you for being a part of this journey, and thank you for being part of Shifting Schools.